Hey everyone, how's your day going? Whether it's been good or rough, you're not alone. So sit back, relax, and let's step into the world of mystery together. I never feared being alone in the woods. Growing up in Colorado, I spent more time outdoors than I did inside. Hiking, fishing, camping, those were the things that made me feel alive. I had taken dozens of solo camping trips before, each one an escape from the noise and stress of city life. This time was no different. At least, that's what I told myself. I had driven 3.5 hours from Denver, cutting through the back roads of Pike National Forest, looking for the perfect secluded spot to set up camp. After navigating a winding dirt road for what felt like forever, I finally found it, a clearing surrounded by dense pines, tucked far away from any hiking trails or campsites. No signs of people. No signs of life. Just how I liked it. I stepped out of the truck, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The scent of damp earth and pine needles filled my lungs, and for a moment, I felt at peace. I grabbed my gear tent, sleeping bag, cooler, and my camera and started setting up. The process was second nature by now. Within half an hour, my tent was pitched, my firewood was gathered, and I had a small campfire going, crackling softly as dusk settled in. I leaned back in my camping chair, sipping a lukewarm beer, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. I should have been enjoying the solitude. But something felt off. Seeing the last remnants of daylight vanish. The fire flickers against the surrounding trees. The only sound is the occasional rustling of leaves. There was something unnatural about the silence that night. Normally, the woods are alive even after dark. Crickets chirping, distant hoots of owls, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. But as I sat there, staring into the fire, I realized it was completely silent. No wind. No insects. Just stillness. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe I was just tired from the long drive. But my gut was telling me something different. I turned on my flashlight, sweeping it across the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating only the trunks of pine trees and thick undergrowth. Nothing. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. You're being paranoid. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach. Something wasn't right. Seen, inside the tent. The fire outside has burned low, casting flickering shadows. The only sound is the soft zip of a sleeping bag as the protagonist gets comfortable. I was lying on my back, scrolling through photos I had taken earlier in the day when I heard it. A voice. Low. Distant. At first, I thought I imagined it. A trick of the wind. But then it came again. A slow, rhythmic chanting barely above a whisper. I froze, my fingers tightening around my phone. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. There was no one out here. I had made sure of that. I turned off my phone screen, sitting up in the darkness. The sound was faint but steady, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. I swallowed hard, reaching for the flashlight beside me. My hand trembled slightly as I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The air was colder now. The fire had nearly died down, leaving only glowing embers. I turned the flashlight toward the trees. The chanting stopped. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. And then, a twig snapped. Snap. A single twig breaking. Loud. Too close. I froze. The night was eerily still. The wind had died down, and even the distant sound of the creek had faded into nothingness. The only noise was the rapid thudding of my own heartbeat. I gripped my flashlight tighter, its beam cutting through the dark like a knife. My breath came in slow, measured exhales as I swept the light across the dense tree line surrounding my campsite. Nothing. No movement. No shifting shadows. No glowing eyes peering back at me from the brush. But I wasn't fooled. I could feel it. I wasn't alone. I took a step back toward my tent, keeping my flashlight trained on the woods. Every muscle in my body was screaming for me to move faster, to get inside, to zip myself in and pretend nothing had happened. But my instincts told me otherwise. If I rushed, if I panicked, whatever was out there would know. I forced myself to walk slowly, casually, as if I wasn't entirely convinced of what I just heard. My skin prickled as I turned my back to the trees for the briefest moment, stepping into the tent and zipping it shut behind me. I sat on my sleeping bag, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. My other hand found the knife I always kept in my camping gear. The silence stretched on. Nothing. Maybe it really was just an animal. Maybe the forest was playing tricks on me. But then, tap, a single, unmistakable tap on the side of my tent. I stopped breathing. Tap, tap, deliberate, slow, like someone testing. My stomach twisted into knots. Every rational part of my brain screamed that it had to be the wind, or a loose branch, or some half-asleep squirrel fumbling around. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was touching my tent. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay completely still. I knew that if I made a sound, whatever was out there would know I was awake. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, just as I started to let out a slow, controlled breath, a shadow passed across the thin fabric of my tent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The shadow stood outside, completely still. I could feel its presence, just inches from where I sat. Then, crunch, a single footstep, then another. Whoever or whatever it wasn't running. It wasn't leaving. It was circling my tent. The soft crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot was slow, deliberate, like it wanted me to know it was there. I clenched the handle of my knife so tightly my fingers ached. Then, without warning, silence. The footsteps stopped. The presence outside my tent vanished. I waited, listened, strained to hear the faintest noise beyond the fabric of my shelter. Nothing, but I still felt it, like it was just beyond my reach, standing in the darkness, waiting. I must have stayed awake for hours, my grip on the knife never loosening. At some point, exhaustion must have taken over, because the next thing I knew, the first light of morning was filtering through the trees. For the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled. I unzipped the tent cautiously, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The fire had burned itself out, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the cool breeze. And then I saw them. Footprints. Not boot prints. Not animal tracks. Bare human footprints, leading directly up to my tent. A shiver crawled down my spine. My stomach twisted painfully as I followed the tracks with my eyes, expecting them to lead back toward the tree line. But they didn't. The footprints ended at my tent. No return path. No sign of retreat. Whoever had been standing outside in the dark, watching me, had simply disappeared. I felt sick. I packed up faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop for breakfast. I didn't bother neatly rolling my sleeping bag or putting out the remaining embers of the fire. I just threw everything into the back of my truck and started the engine. And that's when I saw it. Through the rearview mirror just beyond the edge of the clearing. A figure, standing perfectly still among the trees. Watching me, I couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any details beyond its shape. But I knew, in that moment, that it had been there all night, standing in the woods, waiting. I didn't hesitate. I put the truck into gear and sped the hell out of there. But even as the clearing disappeared behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it let me go, and I didn't know why. I kept driving. I didn't stop. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I didn't dare. The only thing that mattered was getting out, away from that campsite, away from whatever was in those woods. The dirt road stretched ahead, winding between the trees like a never-ending tunnel. I had driven this way before. It had taken me 10 minutes, maybe less, to reach my campsite from the main highway. But now, something was wrong. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 7:13 a.m. I had been driving for over 20 minutes, and the road, it just kept going. A gnawing unease settled in my stomach. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt, like I was pushing against something unseen. I kept glancing at the trees, expecting, dreading, to see something moving between them, but there was nothing. No animals, no birds, no signs of life, only silence. And yet, I wasn't alone. I could feel it, that awful, skin-prickling sensation of eyes on me. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I wasn't stopping, not until I saw pavement, not until I reached the highway and left this nightmare behind. Then just up ahead, a break in the tree line. Relief flooded through me, finally. But as I got closer, my stomach twisted into a cold, painful knot. It wasn't the highway. It was my campsite, I hit the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before coming to a stop. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking. No, that wasn't possible. I had been driving straight. I hadn't turned once. And yet, here it was. The flattened grass where my tent had been. The smoldering remnants of my fire pit. Like I had never left. I shifted the truck into reverse, my foot slamming down on the gas. The engine roared as I backed up, spinning the wheel to turn onto a smaller path I hadn't noticed before. I didn't care where it led. I just needed to go. The road was rougher here, lined with jagged rocks and thick roots clawing through the dirt. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the gear shift so tightly my fingers ached. Then, something moved in my peripheral vision. I snapped my head toward the rearview mirror. My breath hitched, a shadow in the back seat. Not fully formed, not entirely visible, but there. A shape, watching me. I nearly lost control of the truck. My hands jerked the wheel, sending the tires skidding over loose gravel. My pulse pounded against my skull as I tried to steady myself. I didn't want to look. I knew what I saw, but I forced myself to turn around. Nothing. The back seat was empty, but the air felt wrong, like something was still there. And then, just behind me, a whisper. "You're not going the right way." I gasped, my foot slamming on the gas, but my mind was spinning. That voice, it wasn't mine. It wasn't my thoughts. I stole another glance at the mirror, my chest tightening, my throat dry, and then, up ahead, standing in the middle of the road, a figure, the same thing I had seen outside my tent. It wasn't walking. It wasn't moving. It was waiting. I gritted my teeth. No, not this time. I floored it, the truck roaring forward. I didn't care if I ran straight through it. I just needed to leave. But as I got closer, I realized something chilling. The figure wasn't getting closer. The road was pulling me toward it, like I was being delivered to it. I wrenched the wheel to the right, veering off the road and into the trees. Branches scraped against the windshield. The truck bounced violently over uneven ground. My teeth clamped together as I fought to keep control. Then, the ground vanished beneath me. The truck lurched downward, slamming nose first into a ditch. My body jerked forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest. The engine sputtered, then died. Smoke curled from beneath the hood. Everything went still. For a long moment, I just sat there, shaking, listening. No footsteps, no whispering voices, just silence. I swallowed hard, reaching for the keys. My hands trembled as I twisted them in the ignition. Click, nothing. Click, click. The truck was dead. I clenched my jaw, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I was stuck, stranded. And then, tap, soft, deliberate, against the driver's side window. My stomach plummeted. I didn't turn, couldn't, but the tapping came again. Slower this time, more deliberate. Then, just beyond the glass, a voice. "You were never supposed to leave." Tap. A single, deliberate sound. I barely registered it at first. My mind was still reeling from the crash, my ribs aching from the seatbelt's sudden restraint. Then, tap, tap, soft, slow, purposeful. I knew where it was coming from. The driver's side window. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at me not to look. But I did. And there, against the glass, a handprint, slowly forming, as if something was pressing against the window from the outside. At first, I thought it was human, but then I saw the fingers. They were too long, slightly curled, almost claw-like, and as they dragged down the glass, they left behind dark streaks. Not water, not dirt, something thicker, something that looked disturbingly like blood. My stomach clenched. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. And worse, it wanted me to know it was there. My breath came out in sharp, uneven bursts. I needed to move. Now, slowly, carefully, I reached down, feeling for the knife at my hip. My fingers closed around the handle, the cold steel grounding me for a moment. Then I reached for the keys. They weren't in the ignition. A fresh wave of terror surged through me. I had left them in the damn ignition. Frantically, I scanned the truck. Then I saw them, sitting on the passenger seat, neatly placed, like someone had moved them. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't touched them, which meant someone else had. A slow, creaking sound came from above. My body went rigid. The noise was subtle, like shifting weight. A slow press against the metal. Something was on top of the truck. I stayed absolutely still. Then, a long, slow scrape, something dragging its nails across the roof. I clenched my jaw, my breath shallow. My fingers twitched toward the keys. I needed to grab them. I needed to go. Then, from directly above me, a whisper. It wasn't a voice. It was something trying to sound like a voice. Come back. The words sent ice down my spine. Something wasn't speaking to me. It was mimicking speech, like it had heard the words before, but didn't quite understand them. I grabbed the keys. The whispering stopped. And then, a hand slammed against the window. I turned the key in the ignition. Click, click, click. Nothing. I hit the steering wheel, panic tightening around my chest. Come on. Come on. Outside. It hadn't moved. I couldn't see it. Not fully. But I could feel it. Standing there. Watching. Waiting. I turned the key again. The engine roared to life. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires spun, struggling against the mud, then lurched forward. Branches clawed at the windshield as I tore through the underbrush, careening wildly between the trees. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. Then, up ahead, a break in the trees. Relief surged through me. The road. I could finally get out. But as I got closer, my stomach plummeted. It wasn't the highway. It was my campsite. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. No, this wasn't possible. I had driven in the opposite direction. And yet, here I was, back where I started. The flattened grass where my tent had been. The remains of my fire pit. I had never left. Or worse, something had led me back. My fingers dug into the steering wheel, my chest tightening with dread. And then, a figure stepped out of the trees. It wasn't walking toward me. It wasn't even moving. It was waiting, tall, motionless, his face wrong, like something wearing the idea of a human face but not understanding how it should work. I floored the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires screaming against the dirt. But the figure didn't move. And then I realized it wasn't getting closer. I was getting pulled toward it, like the road itself was dragging me in, delivering me. I yanked the wheel to the right, veering off the road, back into the trees. Branches slashed against the windshield. The truck jolted violently, bouncing over uneven ground. Then, the earth disappeared beneath me. The truck plunged downward, nose first into a trench. My body jerked forward, the seatbelt snapping tight against my chest. The engine sputtered, then died. Silence. For a moment I just sat there, shaking, listening. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I reached for the keys. My hands trembled as I tried to restart the engine. Click. Nothing. Click. Click. Still nothing. I was stuck. And then, a single soft knock on the driver's side window. I didn't turn. Couldn't. The knock came again. Slow. Rhythmic. Then, just beyond the glass, a whisper. You were never supposed to leave. Knock. A single, deliberate sound. My pulse jumped. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't a demand. It was slow. Patient. Knock. Knock. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The sound came from the driver's side window. I swallowed, my throat dry. Don't look. Don't look. But the silence pressed in, suffocating. And then, a whisper, right outside the glass. Let me in. My hands clenched the steering wheel. The voice was wrong. Flat. Hollow. Like someone mimicking human speech but not quite getting it right. I forced my breath to steady. Think. Think. The truck was useless. I was trapped. I needed a plan. Slowly, I reached for my knife, still strapped to my belt. The weight of it was reassuring, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't help me against whatever was out there. Then, a sound from the back seat. A slow, deliberate exhale. My chest tightened. There was someone inside the truck with me. My fingers trembled on the knife handle as I turned my head. Nothing. The back seat was empty. But the air was different. Heavy. Occupied. And then, right beside my ear, a whisper. "You shouldn't have left." I jolted forward, grabbing at the door handle, locked. No, it wasn't locked. It just wouldn't open. I yanked harder, slamming my shoulder against it, panic bubbling in my chest. Then, the knocking stopped. The whispering vanished. The world outside went completely still. But I wasn't fooled. I knew it was still there. Watching. Waiting. I had two choices. Stay inside, wait for it to make its next move. Or get out and run. Neither option felt like survival. I inhaled sharply. I needed to move. Slowly, I reached for the passenger door. My fingers curled around the handle, and this time it opened. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I stumbled out, my boots crunching against damp leaves. The truck sat behind me, silent and dead. The forest stretched ahead. Endless. Dark. I turned toward the trees, my pulse hammering. Then, a voice. Right behind me. Low. Calm. Close. "Where do you think you're going?" My stomach twisted. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. I just ran. Straight into the dark. I had been running for what felt like hours. My legs ached, my throat was raw from sucking in the cold night air. And yet, no matter how far I went, the trees never thinned. The path never changed. The forest had swallowed me whole. But I wasn't alone. I could still feel it. Watching. Waiting. And every time I thought I had put enough distance between us, the hairs on the back of my neck would rise, and I'd hear it again. The sound of footsteps. Soft. Measured. Keeping pace with me. Like it knew exactly where I was going. Like it knew. I had nowhere left to run. Then, out of nowhere, the trees parted. I staggered to a stop, gasping, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. A clearing. Bathed in pale moonlight. But not just any clearing. It was the same one I had just escaped. The same open patch of grass. The same dirt. And standing at the center of it, the figure. Waiting. Smiling. Like it had never moved at all. I took a slow, shaky step backward. The figure didn't follow. It didn't have to. Because I understood now. This wasn't a chase. It wasn't trying to catch me. It was letting me realize the truth on my own. I was never going to leave. Not because I couldn't. Because it wouldn't let me. And maybe I had been here before. I clenched my fists, my breath ragged. There were no more roads. No more trails. Just the clearing. Just the thing waiting for me to accept what I already knew. I could keep running. Or I could stop. I could turn around. And I could face it. The moment the thought crossed my mind, the figure tilted its head. Like it knew what I was thinking. Like it had been waiting for me to make that choice. I took a deep breath. And I turned. Some roads never let you leave. Some places choose you. And sometimes you don't remember the last time you were here until it's too late. If you ever find yourself lost in the woods, walking in circles, convinced you're being watched, you probably are. And if you were never supposed to leave, you won't.